Welcome to this unit's lecture, which covers chapters 9 and 10 on communication and power and conflict. Communication is the use of language and nonverbal signs to create shared meaning between two or more people. Much of the satisfaction and dissatisfaction of marriage and family life is rooted in the way that people communicate. We are always communicating to each other in the sense that our words, our lack of words, and our expressions are interpreted by others to say something about our mood, our feelings, and perhaps our relationships. When most people use the term communication, they are probably thinking of verbal communication, the use of words to convey our ideas to others. As symbolic interactionists have shown, humans are symbolic creatures. We create, manipulate, and employ symbols to direct our own behavior and to influence the behavior of others. Words are only a part of the meaning in communication, though. It is estimated that anywhere from 50 to 80% of the meaning we convey is through the nonverbal part of our communication. One psychologist even puts the figure at 90%. There are different kinds of nonverbal communication: clothing worn, facial expressions and eye behavior, touching, and the cues we give in oral speech. Nonverbal cues have a number of functions in communication. They complement our words. They contradict our words. They repeat the message. They regulate communication. They may substitute for words. They may accent the verbal message, and they may trigger attributions. You are probably already getting the sense that human communication is a complex, interactive process, as you can see in this diagram. When you communicate to someone, it depends not only on what you say and how you say it, but also on how the other person interprets what you say and how you say it. The receiver decodes or interprets the message and filters it through his or her ideas and feelings before encoding a reply. At each phase of the process, there can be static, interference of some kind that hinders accurate communication. Now, I'll just highlight where static can occur in the media, but the sender, the media of transmission, and the receiver are all sources of static. Senders may transmit with static because they aren't certain of their own feelings or ideas. Static occurs in the media when there is a discrepancy between the nonverbal and verbal communication. Receiver static occurs when the listener filters the message through his or her own ideas and feelings. We inevitably communicate feelings, and research has shown that the accurate communication of feelings is subject to distortion and misunderstanding. There is a circular process involved, as the sender's intent is interpreted by the other through their own ideas and perceptions. Then the other person has an effective reaction, which is then interpreted by the sender, who has his or her own effective reaction. Research cited in the text points out that there are gender differences in the communication of feelings. Men tend to distort the messages of their female partners in a negative direction, seeing a lack of positive feelings as a sign of hostility. Women tend to interpret the lack of hostility in their male partners as an indication of positive feelings. When we talk with others, we inevitably communicate feelings as well as ideas. The accurate communication of feelings is very important in the marital relationship. Active listening is a crucial skill which can improve the communication of feelings and ideas. There are various ways we can listen to others, not all of which are helpful to effective communication. A number of styles of listening impede effective communication. Fakers only pretend to be listening. Interrupters never allow the other to finish. Self-conscious listeners are concerned primarily with their own status in the eyes of the other, rather than with the ideas and feelings of the other. Intellectual listeners attend only to the words of the other. Ineffective communication impedes intimacy and facilitates misunderstanding, feelings of rejection, and conflict. There are a number of common destructive messages that characterize ineffective communication. Four of the most common are complaining, criticizing, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. also known as John Gottman's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. There are a number of other ways of communicating that are hazardous to a good relationship: ordering, threatening, moralizing, providing solutions, lecturing, ridiculing, analyzing, and interrogating. There are various gender differences that represent impediments to communication. Men rarely talk about personal matters and approach life as a contest in which each party is striving to preserve independence and avoid failure. Women approach life as a community affair in which the goal is to maintain intimacy and avoid being isolated. Another way to look at this is men tend to communicate data and want to be problem solvers, while women communicate to establish connections with others. Communication sometimes lapses into a kind of silent tolerance. While it is true that lack of communication is a common complaint, it is also true that for many couples, the quality of communication improves over the course of the marriage. Satisfying communication is important, but not sufficient for a satisfying marriage. On the other hand, it is necessary. You can't have a satisfying marriage without satisfying communication. Satisfying communication facilitates the growth of both marital satisfaction and intimacy. Couples that are satisfied with their relationship, who define their marriage as a happy one, and who indicate high levels of intimacy, also report satisfying patterns of communication. There are various things that people can do to improve their listening skills, and they're listed here. Everyday conversations may actually be one of the more important ingredients in a satisfying marriage, and self-disclosure comes up repeatedly as an essential factor in an intimate relationship. In marriage, self-disclosure enhances both satisfaction and intimacy. Exchange theory suggests that self-disclosure should be equitable. Certain other aspects of communication are also related to marital satisfaction and intimacy. In happy marriages, there are more stimulating and fun-filled conversations. There are numerous books, workshops, and courses designed to help people improve their communication skills. Skills can be improved by attending to some basic rules and practicing them at every opportunity. All rules for improving communication skills revolve around the goals of making us more effective senders and effective receivers. Let's move on now to take a look at Chapter 10, which covers power and conflict in marriage. Marriage can involve conflict and a struggle for power within the relationship. Shakespeare once said, "The course of true love never did run smooth." Power refers to the capacity to influence others and to resist being influenced by others. The text emphasizes the ability to get someone to think or feel or act in a way that he or she would not have done spontaneously. Conflict theorists regard issues of power and conflict as central to all human interaction. In fact, we need power. To have power is to have some sense of control over our lives. Symbolic interactionists emphasize that what is most important involves whether people define their situation as one in which they have some power. The use of power is inevitable in an intimate relationship. There are different sources of power. Whoever has the most resources will have the most power, according to resource theory. One important resource is money. There are other important non-material resources, such as education, emotional support, budgeting skills, the ability to organize and maintain an efficient home, and parenting skills. Marriage may be looked upon as a power struggle. Reactance theory states that when someone tries to force us to engage in a behavior, even though the behavior is consistent with our attitudes, we are likely to resist and may even change our attitudes. There are various ways that spouses can attempt to either exert or avoid power when communicating with each other. First, a conversation can be either symmetrical or complementary. There are three types of symmetrical discussions: competitive, neutralized, and submissive. In complementary interaction, the two spouses indicate agreement that one is dominant and the other is submissive. Lack of conflict is not necessarily the sign of a good marriage. Healthy marriages have some degree of conflict. Perhaps the most powerful predictor of whether a couple will break up or stay together is the way they handle their differences. In their research, Blood and Wolf found 4 different patterns of power in marriages: husband dominant, wife dominant, autonomic or equal but separate, and syncretic, which means together or acting as a coalition or jointly shared. It may be interesting to consider how your marriage fits into this typology. However, the methodology they used in their research has been criticized, and criticism has also involved the point of view that power involves more than simply who makes the final decisions on specific issues. Ravens, Centers, and Rodriguez have identified 6 different kinds of power that people can exert in a marriage: coercive, reward, legitimate, expert, referent, and informational. Now, I've reproduced table 10.1 for the text, and I'm going to go over the various types, the reasons for compliance, and examples of each to give you a better idea of what they're about. In coercive power, the reason for compliance is to avoid punishment by the spouse. For example, a tired wife agrees to sex to avoid a husband's verbal abuse. In reward power, the reason for compliance is to obtain rewards from the spouse. For example, the husband becomes less messy as the wife praises him for helping keep a clean house. In legitimate power, the spouse has the right to ask and you have the duty to comply. For example, the husband agrees to share household tasks with the working wife because he is committed to equality. In expert power, compliance occurs because the spouse has special knowledge or expertise. For example, the wife trusts the husband's judgment about cars and lets him decide which one to buy. In referent power, compliance involves identifying with and admiring the spouse and wanting to please him or her. For example, the husband goes to the opera and tries to learn more about and enjoy operatic music that the wife loves. And finally, informational power. Compliance occurs because one is persuaded by the spouse that what the spouse wants is in his or her own best interests. For example, the wife votes Democratic, even though she is a Republican, because the husband convinces her that women will benefit more under Democrats. Conflict can have both positive and negative consequences for a marriage, but conflict need not have deleterious consequences. Well-managed conflict has a number of positive functions. Conflict brings issues out into the open. Conflict helps clarify issues. Conflict can promote growth. Small conflicts help to diffuse more serious conflict, and conflict can create and maintain an equitable balance of power. If a marriage is generally satisfying, the amount of conflict tends to diminish over time. There are countless topics that are the subject of marital conflict, including decisions, attention and rewards, division and fulfillment of responsibility, and sloppy, impulsive, or careless behavior. People fight about everything and anything. To know what people fight about is not necessarily to know why they fight. There are social, interpersonal, and personal sources of tension. Issues about money are a common battleground in marriages. Another social factor is the illusions that prevail in our society, including the notion that a marriage can be conflict-free. Conflict also arises from tensions within the relationship and within individual spouses, including the following areas: power and control, nurturance, intimacy and privacy, trust, and fidelity. People use different styles of conflict resolution. Competition, avoidance, accommodation, compromise, and collaboration are all described in the text, and they involve varying levels of concern for oneself and concern for the other. This leads us to certain principles of good fighting. Couples who have a strong relationship maintain their perspective and save their energies for the issues that are really important. There are tensions in life that can lead to marital conflict, and people need to develop tension outlets. Avoiding the buildup of festering resentment means that each partner must be open and honest about his or her feelings. Many conflicts that could otherwise have been handled constructively work out badly for a couple simply because they occurred at the wrong time. While communication is not a cure-all, it is important not to handle conflict with the silent treatment or by simply hoping that everything will turn out well with the passage of time. One must communicate without ceasing. People who are happily married for many years believe in the importance of both accommodation and compromise in conflict. Another principle of good fighting is that conflict should be used to attack problems and not one's spouse. And finally, couples must keep loving while they're fighting.